Ever. Like, really stop and think about your senses. Like, not just, going through the motions of everyday life, but really thinking about them.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing today, diving into Michel Serres' The Five Senses. But, and this is important, this isn't your typical philosophy book.
Right.
It's more like, almost like poetry mixed with personal stories. And it's all about how we experience the world.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about Serres? He's trying to break free from language, even while he's using it, to write.
Meta, right?
Totally. He wants us to get back to this idea of le don. It's French, it means, like the given. That raw sensory experience we have before we put it into words.
So it's like he's saying language can actually hold us back from truly experiencing the world around us.
Exactly. Think about how often you're just like translating your senses into words in your head instead of actually feeling them. Serres wants us to wake up to how rich those experiences are, those experiences that our thoughts sometimes drown out.
And he does that by exploring each of the senses in a different chapter.
Yeah.
But, and this is the cool part, each chapter also reflects the whole book.
Yeah.
It's like those holograms, where
Yeah.
each piece can still show you the whole picture.
It's very deliberate.
Yeah.
Serres wants us to see how interconnected our senses really are. It's not like we experience the world in isolation,
Right.
Sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, they all work together. They blend
Yeah.
to make this complete picture.
And like our senses, we're going to connect these different ideas from Serres throughout our deep dive today.
Yeah.
And I think a good place to start is this image Serres gives us. A woman meticulously drawing a map of her own skin as if it could mirror the whole world.
Such a strong image, right? It's a metaphor for how our skin is like a living map of everything we've gone through.
Every scar tells a story, right?
Every touch, every wrinkle. It's like a physical manifestation of our own history. This reminds me of how Serres talks about tattoos.
Oh, right. Those permanent marks of experience literally etched onto our bodies.
Exactly. Like that sailor he talks about, whose tattoos told all the stories of his voyages, all the people he'd met.
So powerful.
And that leads us to another image, one that really captures this feeling of urgency, of things changing. The story of Sarah's near-death experience in a shipwreck.
It's like you can practically feel the heat, the smoke, the panic of trying to escape this burning ship.
Oh, absolutely. And for Serres, this wasn't some story. This was his reality.
Right. And he describes it so vividly,
Yeah.
This feeling of being trapped between two worlds, life or death, inside or outside.
Right. It's in that experience, in that in-between space where Serres finds his definition of the soul.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Not some abstract idea, but like a visceral moment of choice.
Yeah.
Forged in this intense transition. And it really makes you think about that phrase, save our souls, in a whole new light.
Doesn't it? I never thought about it like that before, but how does this idea of the soul as a point of transition connect back to the senses for Serres?
It's all about layers. You see, just like our skin, our perceptions have layers too.
Okay.
Serres talks about veils, these layers of perception that we often try to tear down to get to some kind of truth.
Like ripping off a Band-Aid.
Yeah, but Serres, he suggests something else, something he calls unveiling.
So not ripping off the Band-Aid, but carefully peeling it back.
Exactly. And it makes me think of those paintings, by Pierre Bernard that Serres talks about.
Really?
All those layers of fabric and foliage, skin.
Yeah.
They don't expose some bare reality, they add to it,
So it's really understanding someone doesn't come from stripping away their complexities, but appreciating all those layers.
Exactly.
Their experiences, their thoughts, all the things that make them who they are.
Yes, and appreciating these layers, finding meaning in the different perspectives, it's key to understanding Serres, I think.
Yeah.
And this idea of appreciating layers, it carries over into how Serres thinks about sound. Specifically, he talks about this fascinating contrast between silence and noise, particularly in a theater setting.
Oh, right. He talks about that smooth silence just before a performance starts, like a space of pure potential.
Yeah.
And then the audience comes in and it's just this wave of sound, a shell of language, he calls it.
I love that description. You can practically feel the energy shift, right?
Literally.
And through this contrast, what Serres highlights is that often true eloquence, it comes from silence. He compares Socrates' death, which was very, very loud, surrounded by his followers, all talking, to the silent observation of a soothsayer, someone who listens to the world before speaking.
It's an interesting comparison.
It really is.
He's saying, hey, in this world that's so obsessed with noise and information.
Right.
Sometimes it's the quiet moments that hold the most truth.
Yeah. And it's so relevant today, don't you think?
Oh, totally. We're constantly bombarded with information.
Exactly. We're drowning in it.
Yeah.
But Sarah's reminds us of how powerful silence can be, of stepping back from that constant flow of information to reconnect,
Reconnect with ourselves.
and our senses, yes.
And speaking of reconnecting with our senses, Sarah's takes us on a journey from the quiet contemplation of sound to, a full-blown sensory feast when he talks about taste and smell.
He does.
He actually compares sensory experience to a banquet.
It's so fitting, that analogy.
I mean, when you think about it,
Yeah.
Out Sarah is all about experiencing a variety of flavors, textures, this abundance.
And
This
generosity is not just about taking in data,
Right.
And that's exactly how Sarah's sees our senses.
It's like he's saying there's this whole other world of knowledge, of experience that exists beyond language.
Yes, beyond just the rational
Yeah.
mind. And this is where smell comes in.
Okay.
Sarah's talks about two types of tongues. There's the first tongue, which is all about language.
Right.
And then there's the second tongue, which is ruled by taste and smell.
Yeah. And it's funny because, he's right. Smell can be so powerful, right? Like one whiff of something and it just brings back all these memories.
Absolutely. Like that Proust story, right?
Exactly, with Madeline. But he goes even further. He's like, there's this whole other world of knowledge and experience that we access through, he calls it the second tongue, taste and smell.
He does. And sadly, he argues, in our modern world, we're obsessed with data, with information.
Right.
We're kind of losing touch with that sensory richness.
Yeah, it's like we're trading in real experiences for, data points.
He tells this story, actually, about a computer that can't even tell the difference between wine and Coca-Cola.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's a little sad.
He's a little sad. It's like, are we becoming so reliant on technology that we're losing the ability to just, experience things directly?
It's a big concern for Sayers. He calls it, get this, a form of cultural anorexia.
Wow.
We're so focused on the abstract, on just information, that we're rejecting the nourishment of the real world, the world our senses experience. Think about how much time we spend glued to our phones,
Right.
just bombarded by notifications. It's easy to get sucked in and lose sight of the simple pleasures, the sensory experiences that are right in front of us.
Yeah, and you know what? I feel that. Even just prepping for this deep dive, I was so in my head reading, researching, and I forget to, go outside.
It's so easy to do.
It is. But he doesn't just leave us there, right?
Right.
Feeling hopeless.
Oh, no, not at all. Sayre, he offers us a way out, and an antidote to this digital anorexia.
No.
He wants us to become active participants in our own sensory experiences.
Okay, I like that.
To engage with the world through, and this is another one of his terms, through visiting.
Visiting.
Yeah, it's not just passively observing, but really immersing yourself.
So it's the difference between glancing at a painting in a museum and really stopping, taking it in, noticing the brushstrokes, the color.
Yes.
Letting it all wash over you.
Or even think about trying a new dish. Not just wolfing it down, but really tasting it.
Right.
The textures, the way the flavors work together.
So being present in those moments, basically.
Exactly. And there's this great phrase Sayers uses, it's drouillez-vous, which basically means untangle yourself.
Untangle yourself.
Yeah, find your own way, trust your intuition, let your senses be your guide.
So it's not about throwing away technology, throwing away information. It's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Okay.
Recognizing that both have value, but it's how we use them.
Right. Make them work for us, not the other way around.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the five senses, I think what Sayers wants us to take away is that rediscovering the world through our senses, it's not just about pleasure.
Yeah.
It's about knowledge. It's about connection.
It's about really understanding the world around us.
And ourselves even. And Sayers reminds us that those senses, they're not just, passive receivers.
Right.
They are powerful tools, and it's up to us to use them.
To untangle ourselves. I love that. Well, on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, we'd like to leave you with a little something to ponder. Sayers writes that death turns us into words. Words turn us into dead people. So we ask you, what are the sensory experiences that you want to keep alive? Not just in memory, but in the real, visceral experience of your senses. How can you cultivate those experiences and let them shape how you see the world? That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.